You can probably see that I've written a book called Leading High Performance, and it's kind of a blend of coaching stuff. I'm a rowing coach. I'm a qualified British rowing coach. I'm an ex-rower myself to international level, long time ago. I think the boats were wooden in my day and had a load of animals on them. So I started off in rowing. My favourite sport was rugby, but I was about 6'2", very thin. I used to break a lot, and they said you need to bulk up, and I went and joined the rowing club because they got the best food, steaks and chicken and milk and stuff like that. And they discovered that actually I was a better rower than I was a rugby player, and that was kind of it, really. So my son's doing the rugby for me now. Anyway, so I also run businesses. I've run companies all over the world, multinational companies, and one of the things that's always struck me is that there are two great lies in business, and you'll hear business leaders say these two lies all the time. Anybody think what the first lie is? We welcome competition. Second lie, people are our most important asset. And then they continue then demonstrate that both of those are not exactly front and centre of their thinking. I've seen quite a few things in my time which I haven't been too impressed with in business. If anybody remembers kind of the meltdown in the technology sector in about 2001, 2002, quite a few people went to jail in America, WorldCom, Enron, Tyco. I was kind of part of that. My parent company was a company called Global Crossing. Their leadership was particularly unimpressive and were doing all sorts of plea bargains to keep themselves out of trouble. So I've seen the very bad side of leadership in organisations, and I've seen the really good side of coaching at all levels of sport. And what I've generally found is that most leaders in business are average, and most coaches, because average is what it means, most coaches are generally average, but they're doing things for different reasons, they have different motivations. And what I generally find is that even average coaches are really outperforming average leaders every time, just because of their sheer enjoyment, commitment, and the things that they do. They work harder, they work longer, they're more concerned for people, and they certainly like competition. So that was kind of the genesis of the book. So I'll just start off with a little presentation, which will take you through this. This was about the middle of 2012. I was listening to the radio and I was hearing, time after time and time again, lots and lots of things in the radio about businesses going under. And generally what was happening is the leaders were getting away with it, normally getting a nice golden parachute and leaving the followers. I don't use the term followers disparagingly or pejoratively. It's just people who have to follow leaders. And they were the ones who were suffering. And all of that will be fairly common to you. You'll recognise what was going on. And with that sort of environment, I sat down and did a quick, this is kind of the origins of the book. I did one of my usual things. I sat down and had a quick rant on paper, and then also did what I usually do. I put it away for about 3 months. And I got it out again, having heard another piece of radio clippage, and I thought, actually, there may be something here. So I wrote another bit more of the book, put that away for another 3 months. And by about 2013, I got it out again and said, actually, I'll finish this off. And so that was kind of the genesis of the book. And really what you see is that in sport, there's a completely different attitude, a different feel around successful teams, whether they're at the amateur level or the professional level or whatever. And there's this kind of the team feel, there's the sort of exhilaration of winning. And generally, coaches in sport, and certainly the athletes themselves, absolutely do welcome competition. Right? It's why they're there, and they love testing themselves. And when you see what's going on, and this is kind of my favourite one. Anybody see these AC-72s? Absolutely unbelievable machines. These are a business. This is a multi-million dollar business for every single team in it. But it's still got the feel of sport. It's still got the feel of commitment to athletes. It's still got that whole kind of excitement and exhilaration around it, even though it's a very, very big global business. So as I say, right the way from the amateur level, right the way through to the top of professions, you get this feeling in sport that kind of people are engaged and people are fired up. And that's kind of what I like and what I don't often see in big business. Okay. So what I generally find is that leaders in business, most organisations are average, most leaders in leadership are average. It's what the word means, and I'll kind of demonstrate that at the end with one of the slides. But what's worse for me is that, as I say, leaders generally pay lip service to this thing about people are our most important asset. in business. And what you often find is that they will get rewards for average performance, even poor performance sometimes. And the worst thing, of course, is that when the leadership causes catastrophes in business, it's generally the followers who get hurt the most. I think with the RBS issues, I think 36,000 people lost their jobs eventually, something like that. So those are the things that really got me about business. And generally, as we were saying yesterday at a little chat we were having, is that when you fail in business, when you fail in strategy delivery, and you're failing to be successful as a business, it's a failure of leadership. It's not a failure of followership generally. Okay. So coaches in sport, and this is quite the interesting thing. In business, it's quite easy for leaders to hide poor performance. They can say, well, the market changed, this happened, competitor did this, a patent ran out, and it's quite easy for them to hide their own poor performance. Whereas in sport, coaches neither can hide it nor do they wish to. They genuinely welcome competition. They're there because they want to compete with their teams and their athletes. So they actually relish it. It's kind of their raison d'etre. So it's why they do what they do. But more interestingly for me, when I look at the way I behave as a coach and the way I see other people behaving when they're coaching, is they have a real interest in and concern for the athletes. And how many coaches have we got in? People who do coaching here? Fantastic. One of the things you pick up all the time is this concern for your athletes. They are not just people. You're not just a bum on a seat in a boat. They're not just somebody on a field. Unless you understand your athletes and what's driving them, you can't actually bring them together as a team. I hope you agree with that. So there is, in sport, there's this general concern for athletes as individuals, athletes as squads, and then the people you take out of the squad for the team. And one of the really difficult things for coaches, anybody work a squad and team system, that you have people sitting in a squad from which you take teams? Yeah? One of the most difficult things for coaches, I think, is keeping the team fired up, but also keeping the squad, the people who didn't make the team on that occasion, also infused and motivated as well. And you just don't see that sort of effort and hard work going in business. And so that's one of the things I really like about coaching. Now, this other thing here about coaches do the hard work. And we were talking again about this yesterday, about what's happening with leaders in business. Generally, when leaders have a strategy or a plan to succeed, they hand it out to their senior management, their business heads, and they basically get on with that, make that happen. And they tend not to get too involved in the detail or the hard work that goes with making a plan or a strategy happen. It's very much handed over to others. Whereas in coaching, there is a huge commitment to hard work, to planning for the development of athletes, their training, right the way down to their nutrition, their psychology, planning for races, competitions, even getting kit on the road into a venue. So coaches are involved at this high level, strategic level, planning to get their team or their athletes winning in competitions, and also right down at the detail level, right down to nutrition, to equipment and things like that. And how many people, again, from the coaching crowd who are in business, find that they're doing much more of the detail work and the top level work in coaching compared to business? Does that sort of ring true? Yeah, kind of some of the things that you're doing at coaching, you're covering the whole range of things and probably enjoying it quite a lot more, engaging with the athletes. And yet when you go into business, you almost find that things are just being dumped on you and it just feels completely different. So that's one of the other things. And then also, as you get to a more interesting level in sports coaching, you're starting to get really interested in things like sports science and psychology and things like that. So you've got this full range, if you like, of human endeavour, which you have to try and manage as a coach, and which I don't often see leaders, certainly leaders in top businesses, managing at all. It's very superficial in many large organisations. So in terms of the difference between coaches of athletes and the leaders and their followers, is that when I'm working with groups of leaders, I'm a bit naughty because I say to them, the leading question is, what is it that leaders need? Okay, and we then start to fill flip charts with they've got to be highly charismatic, great interpersonal skills, huge communicators. And after about 10 minutes of filling flip charts and putting them up, and I can normally get 3 or 4 flip charts out of this, I will say, so what does this person look like? And they sort of look at me a little bit strange and say, well, you know, what would they be wearing? Even more strange looks. And basically it's going to be a blue lycra suit with a big S on the front and a red cape, because these are totally unrealistic. Okay? But that's generally how consultants and people like that work with leadership. You know, it's all of these amazing traits that these leaders should have. And I try and turn that round, and I say to people, forget leaders, what is it that followers need? Because without followers, you can't have a leader. And it's actually quite simple. And I'll put the other bit up here. But basically, what followers need in business is that. It's about 5 things. A sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of excitement. Excitement's a difficult one because one person's excitement is another person's terror. So leaders have to manage that very carefully. And a sense of belief in kind of themselves and what they're doing. And the last one's really important, an authentic leader. And what I say to people is, you can lead in any way that you like. You know, if you are slightly introverted, or you know, anybody who's done all these MBTIs and psychological profiling and stuff like that, you don't have to be an outgoing, charismatic, hard-driving person. You can lead in any way that you like. What your followers are looking for is authenticity, generally, and consistency and this sort of stability in the leader. Because if you can provide those other 4 things, your followers are now engaged. And coaches have known this all the time. All right? In coaching, you absolutely know that if you cannot provide this sense of belief, this excitement, the ability to develop trust in your athletes, you're not going to have a successful team. And again, I'd hope the coaches here would agree with that. You really have to engage with the athletes. You have to understand when they're injured. You've got to understand when they've got problems at home and why their performance might be dropping off. You really do get into the individual and the team and the squad. And that is a huge difference. And I've worked in some businesses where you've got really nice little tight groups. You'll work late at night. You'll sometimes go out and have pizzas together because you've just done a hard... And you know each other and you start to trust each other. And you begin to get that team feel in business. And that's a very nice feeling when it happens. The interesting thing, again, the big difference is that in sport, athletes understand that they have a responsibility as well. Right? They're not just dumb actors in the play. In fact, they are the key actors in the play, and they have to take responsibility for their own training, their own development, under the auspices of the coach. In businesses, that's not always true. Especially where you have average to poor leaders, followers don't accept they have a responsibility for high performance. They think if they turn up with a pulse, that's kind of good enough. And that the leaders will do everything and direct them and tell them what to do and all the rest of it. So there is this dual thing that you need to do in business as a good leader, is to really impress on followers that they have a responsibility. And that's quite a big change in thinking for some organisations. As I say, in top teams, coaches that's not even voiced. In organisations, it's not even voiced. But because of the failures, it will be a failure of leadership when the followers aren't engaged. So I hope that makes sense. And this is the interesting thing for me, is leaders may shape an organisation, but followers make it happen. You'll see in the book that I've got a version of an organisation, quite a complex organisation. But when you look at it, you can draw a circle or an oval around the middle of the organisation, and that is where business happens, in the middle management. It's kind of the middle managers who are out seeing customers, who are out soliciting for tenders and bids and work. They're turning around the technical queries, and they're probably even signing the smaller contracts and making business happen. Okay? The leader, the CEO, isn't pressing the flesh with customers. He's not getting the contract. The leadership team isn't out and about winning the work. That's being done in the middle of the organisation, generally. So if they're not engaged, things aren't happening as well as you're not going to get this any performance really, let alone high performance. Okay. And this is probably a little bit controversial, but I hope it kind of makes sense. Great coaches should not be great leaders, but those who wish to be great leaders must be great coaches. And there's quite a big change in thinking. Carl Goshen, who's the head of Nissan, has really voiced this some time ago, and basically saying that this idea of a coaching style in business is becoming more and more important, especially with some of the younger people coming through, the Gen Yers and things like that. You really do have to engage with them, and this coaching style is one of the ways in which you can engage with them. I don't know, any takes on that as a little saying? Is that understood? Why coaches shouldn't be great leaders? Now there have been. We were talking just earlier about people like Ferguson. Ferguson was a leader. He had absolutely set himself up as the leader, and everything else was subordinate to him. But he kind of got away with that style, if you like, because he's had such huge, what I call domain knowledge and technical knowledge, and was able to just drive that through. He was 30 years, I think, 35 years, 26 years at Manchester, 27 years at Manchester United. But in general, the very best coaches, especially in big team sports, what they tend to do is identify the leaders in the team and then make sure that as long as they're developing the squad and the individual athletes at the team level, they're also very carefully and very quietly developing the leaders in the group, because they know that once that team gets out on the field beyond the control of the coach, that's where the leadership has to happen. And good teams that are being successful, if you've got a coach who set himself up as a leader, the team can still be successful. What tends to happen is that once it starts to unravel a little bit, and it's a bit leaders on field, they can suddenly implode spectacularly if you don't have leadership within the team. And that's the danger of a coach setting themselves up as a leader. Generally what you see with really strong leadership in the team on the field is that when things are going wrong, they'll try and reorganise, they'll find ways of sorting it out themselves. And that, to me, is the power of not being a great leader as a coach, leaving it to the leadership in the team. And good coaches kind of understand that. And there's just a little simple model. I hope people who are involved in coaching can see that. But very simply, you've got the coaching and the coaching team at the top. They are very clearly going to be the ones who identify the critical success factors, what it's going to take to win in the competitive environment. And then you have selection. The good coaches create the right environment. Coaches generally don't motivate athletes. That's a bit controversial, I know. Athletes have to be motivated themselves. What coaches can do is create an environment in which that athlete's motivation can really thrive. It's very difficult to motivate somebody. It's not, you can't just say, I'm going to motivate you. Right? It has to come from the athlete generally. But you can create the environment where that will thrive. And then, of course, there's the performance side of that. That's the training and the development and the plans, the journey that you take your athletes on. And then, of course, psychology, which is incredibly important in sport, but seems to be not really thought of too much in business. I think the most that businesses do is a quick MBTI, a Belbin or a Fire OB or something like that to get some sort of profile. So probably so they can put some of their followers into boxes and say, okay, you're this type, you're that type, rather than thinking about how this all fits together as a team. And sitting in the middle are, the things that the coaching team will develop, which is the vision, the ethos. And this is really important. When you go into really successful teams, one of the things you pick up very quickly in sport is there is a palpable core ethos driving that team. The way they behave, the way they treat each other, their goals, the way they're trying to make those goals. And that is one of the things that comes from the coach and the coaching team, this core driving ethos, which sets the standards, if you like, with how that team operates. And again, quite often you don't see that in business, or sometimes it can be flawed in quite bad ways. And I think leaders in businesses miss this thing. We call it values in business. Values are incredibly powerful drivers, but very rarely do they come from kind of within the group. These are things that are kind of handed down, end up on a laminated board outside somebody's workstation. And when you say, what are your values? They say, integrity. And that's about it. It suddenly goes, because they didn't get involved themselves. It wasn't something they lived and breathed. So that, again, is one of the big differences between sport and businesses. Athletes are living and breathing their values, and in business it tends to be a handed down, almost a checkbox from the board. So, okay, we've done that, that can go in the annual report. Okay. And for me, that is the biggie, selection. Okay, you can imagine that when you're putting something together in terms of sport, as a coach, you are selecting very carefully. It's very unlikely that if you select a sumo wrestler for the pole vault, he's going to be particularly successful. Okay, so there are certain things that you're going to be looking for in your athletes. Now, the more complex a sport gets and the more technical equipment, if you like, that it needs, the less it requires you to rely on genetics and DNA. I don't know if that makes sense. The more complex a sport and the more kind of equipment that you need and things like that, the more it comes down to the actual the drive, the desire of the athletes themselves to do the hard work. Okay, and by that I mean, obviously there are some sports where that's not true. If you take the 100-meter sprint and the Usain Bolts, there's a little aphorism that says, if you want to be a really successful 100-meter sprinter, first choose your parents carefully. Okay? Okay, but that's one of the rare occasions. As you get into rugby, as you get into hockey, as you get into some of these big team sports, it is about the application the athletes are going to put in. So there's a few things around the athletes where selection is absolutely critical, and we'll come on to that again. To me, this is the absolutely huge difference between sport and business. Okay, is in selection. So in one of the core models in the book is what I call the performance triangle. So I'm just going to keep a quick check on time. And the performance triangle, this could be the individual athlete. It could be the department. Well, if we stay with sport, it could be the athlete. It could be the squad, it could be the team. In an organisation, this could be the follower, it could be the department, the function, or the whole organisation, as I'll show you in a minute. But what you basically get is the athlete comes with attributes. So you select for attributes. So if you're looking for a rugby prop, or you're looking for a rugby scrum half or a fullback, you're beginning to select for attributes. So the guy that you select as a prop isn't going to look like a wing. All right, so you're immediately thinking about attributes for the roles that you're looking for within the team. Okay? And then the key one, attitude. Right? So you're looking to select for the right attitudes that you want within the team, that fits with the team values, that fits with this ethos and everything else. And then you have fitness in sport. You're looking for people to be very fit. And then you're looking for technical ability. So you can see that the more complex a sport becomes, the more teamy it becomes, the more kit it needs, something like, let's say, rowing, my sport, which is very technical. The less DNA plays a part, and the more the attributes and attitude plays a part, and then, of course, training and things like that. So the athlete brings those two, basically. And you have to select for those because that's what comes with the athlete. You can do a bit of development on them, but they are the core things that the athlete brings. So quite obviously then, that's what the coach brings. That makes sense. I'm sure, again, your coaches will recognise this and you'll be saying, yeah, it's pretty obvious. This is kind of what we do. But it's quite nice to have it as a model that you can work with. And if you get all of those things right, you'll end up with high performance. So that's kind of the core model. And there's sort of something that goes, which is, so what? What do you do with this now? And the interesting thing, that's kind of a static model. But as I say, it can be applied to the individual, the team, the organisation. This is the so what. This is what you can do with the model. You've got performance up the left-hand side, time over the left. If you take a typical Olympic training program of 4 years, that could be 4 years. I don't know what it is in terms of your own sports, but generally when a novice rower comes into the club with great expectations because they've got the right attitude, when am I going to win something? I basically say you're going on a 3-year journey. If you've never rowed before, it'll take us about 3 years to get you to Henley. All right? So it's about setting expectations. So there's a time scale there. And we're talking about goal setting. Everybody here happy with goals, presumably? How many sorts of goals do you normally use? Outcome goals? Performance goals? Anybody use process goals? Yeah, okay, good. So again, I find in sports that coaches and people in sports are very familiar with those three main goals: outcome, performance, and process. In business, we talk about goals. And you say, well, what sort of goals are you talking about? Oh, we're talking about goals. You say, yeah, but what sort of goals? Well, targets. And there's this kind of no separation between outcome, performance, and process, or very little. And even when you do see goals in organisations, they tend to be outcome goals. What's the big danger with outcome goals? Win or lose, succeed or fail. That's pretty demotivating. Especially if you're about to embark on a 3-year journey and you stick 15 outcome goals there. You've got 15 chances to fail. And I think as sports people, we recognise that, and so we concentrate on performance goals. So what you're looking for is an outcome eventually. You try and not hide it from the athlete, but you're saying, no, that's where we're going to try and get you, but we're not going to focus on that. What you focus on are those. So you set all these performance milestones over the journey. So I'm probably preaching to people who know all of this already, so I'll whiz on. And then, of course, you've got a whole load of process goals in there as well. And you've got a whole load of test points. Okay, so I'm sure that looks really familiar. How many people see this in business? How many people take their followers, or if you're a follower, how have you been taken on this sort of journey in business, where you're really clear about what it is that you're doing within your strategic time horizon to make this strategy work? And that's one of the big differences between sports coaches and business leaders. This is the hard work. Every single one of these comes with sheets of spreadsheets and times and athlete performance and qualitative and quantitative information. The amount of work that coaches do with each individual athlete. I mean, the data points for the rowing, if I've got an 8, if I'm rowing with an 8, I've generally got about 14 to 16 people in the squad. I'm testing 14 to 16 people. They are training every day of the week bar one, and they're reporting their ergo scores, they're reporting their running scores, getting about 32 data points all the time, every week, for each athlete. Right? Never see that level of detail in business, really testing what's going on. Because if you do that, how do you know who to put in the team? How do you know who's performing? Who's on the game? Who's off the game? And that means what you can do here, once you've got this kind of thing in your brain, you can start to move this athlete. So this is the individual at the moment. You can start to move that athlete on the journey. And you can see here that when you first get a raw athlete, they're not very fit. So your first job as a coach is to build fitness, because until they're fit, you can't push them on the technical ability side. As they get fitter, you can move them up the curve and you can start really adding to technical ability. You're still doing the fitness stuff as well. But it's the attributes and certainly the attitude. Oops, should be attitude on the side. But it's got the attitude is the thing that keeps them driving and doing the training. Okay? And then, of course, you get to the very top. So you can see what's happened at the top. The attitude suddenly takes over again. And the way I put that across is if you have 6 or 8 Olympic athletes lined up on the starting line for a gold medal race, it's pretty safe to assume there's absolutely nothing to choose between them in terms of their fitness. They are as fit as sports science, nutrition, nutrition and sports science can make them. They are probably as technically able as each other, as all of that can make them as well. Their coaches know exactly what it is that they need to do. So what is it that makes a difference right at the very top levels of sport? It's back to attitude again. And the way I put that in, if you take a rowing race that people have trained 4 years for, if you take a GB8 lined up on the start line for a 2,000 metre race, they've been training for 4 years, they are going to row for something just over 5 minutes, and they're going to win and lose by the margin of the width of a mobile phone. That's what it comes down to, and that's when the attitude really kicks in. So you go through this cycle. So again, I hope that makes the triangle make sense. Very quickly, you can see how this works. You've got the contender group that you're selecting from. You as a coach select your selection gate to let people into the squad. And this is why selection is so important in sport, as you all know, but we don't do this in business. Generally, selection is left to a line manager who says, I need such and such a person. They say, oh, do a quick job description, we'll go out and advertise. And there's really no sort of profiling, no real selection process that says this is exactly the sort of person we want for this job. Right the way down to receptionists and people like that. One of the key points of contact for organisations. If you want a high performance organisation, pretty much everybody in there has to have the potential to be a high performer, and you as a coach will bring that potential out. But if you don't select for it, you'll have an average organisation. The good news is it sounds a little bit kind of elitist, that, but selecting high performers for one style of organisation doesn't preclude those who didn't get in from being a high performer in another type of organisation. If you can think about the two mentalities that you need in Ryanair and Singapore Airlines, The people who like Ryanair have a particular mindset that doesn't work in Singapore Airlines. So you can have a high performer who has failed selection for Singapore because they've got the wrong profile, who are brilliant in Ryanair. The cultures are very different. So just because you're selecting for one sort of, it's not elitism, it's getting the right shape of team for your organisation. Okay? And there will be people who don't fit and you should reject them because they're going to fit somewhere else in another high performance team. So I hope that makes sense. And then what you're doing in organisations is, if you now take this triangle as being the whole organisation, there's a threshold of performance. So here I've got a minimum market entry performance. This is what you would need to do just to survive. But what you're going to do as a leader in an organisation, as the coach of the organisation, you're going to expand the skills, the ability, the performances to try and get you to a high performance position. So you can say that's where the average is. Okay? So the inner circle is just what it takes to survive in that business. Then you find that your competitors are all sitting in that red ring, the average performance. But if you're a high performance leader with a high performance team, you want to do that. And you're going to expand the capabilities of that organisation. And what we mean by that, expand the capabilities of the people. Because the organisation is about people. So you're taking those people you selected for high performance, developing the potential to drive you out beyond average. Okay? And that's your new organisation filling the space. And that's just showing how you take that organisation. Again, it's like the athlete, the whole organisation goes on that journey, and you can see that it's starting to fill the space. It moves from minimum performance to average performance to full performance. Okay? So you can see the two similarities between sport and organisations. And then this is really what you're trying to do. If this is average, everybody's sitting here in terms of their performance as the average performance. What you're trying to do as a coach and as a business leader is move people into the outlier position, to the high performance position. And this is a very deliberate photograph. This is a trainer with one of the rubber bands on. What you find if you're a high performance leader or a high performance coach with a high performance team is as you move further out, the rubber band gets tighter and tighter and tighter. So the minute you let the pressure off, you're coming back to average. So what's one of the other things about leadership and about coaching? It's hard work, and it remains hard work because you have to stay out there. So when you're a high performer, you are working at full stretch all the time. And that's the difference between kind of average and high performance. Some people really like having that tension on them all the time to keep people out in that high performance zone. Okay? And that's kind of what makes the difference. And then finishing off, psychology in sport is huge. And even in my own sort of amateur way, in our clubs, in rowing in particular, psychology is really quite a big deal. We see it all the time. As you get towards the top of high performance, it's the psychology, it's the mindset, it's the way the brain works that makes the difference between the people who are going to win by a mobile phone's width and those who aren't. Okay. So how does that translate into business? Because obviously, and I've worked with business people say the psychology stuff, it's a load of rubbish. It's mumbo jumbo, and it's kind of Californian thing. Let's all hold hands in a room and go, and they kind of get a bit nervous about the whole psychology thing. But when you turn it into this, and this is the model that I would use in business, it suddenly makes sense. And we go back to goals, outcome goals, performance goals, and process goals. The outcomes, you get better mental performance, superior mental skill, mental resilience, mental toughness. Those are the outcomes if you can apply some of the relevant techniques. Not all techniques translate across from sport into business. But if you can translate some of the relevant ones across, like goal setting and managing, so these are your process things, relaxation, energizing, self-talk, imagery and visualization. Anybody use any of these? Anybody do self-talk? You all do self-talk. You may not call it self-talk, but you all do self-talk. All right? If you formalize that and start to train it as a skill, anybody happy what I mean with self-talk? Sometimes you get up in the morning and you think, yeah, God, I've got to go and do this job. I'm not too happy about that. How am I going to do it? And you're starting to think things through. That's self-talk. You can turn that into a really strong discipline by formalizing it, codifying it, and then making it much tighter and much more applicable to what you're doing. Imagery and visualization, people do that. Yeah. We do it in our normal lives without knowing. It's the way our brains work. But when you start talking to business people about it, oh God, we can't touch that sort of stuff. But when you get it right, it's incredibly powerful for developing this toughness, resilience, and mental ability. Okay? So it's nothing more than that. And then finally, this is what it is that you're trying to do. So leaders, and this really back to organisations, leaders have two big levers that they can pull. They're the organisational factors. So if you're a leader, you're going to be setting the vision, the values, the strategy, the critical success factors, KPIs, goals, support mechanisms, reinforcement and process. That's one of the leaders you have, and one of the levers you have as a big leader is that kind of organisational factors. And then the really important one is this one, people factors. So you're talking about selection. For me, selection is quite a big one. Capability development, resource provision, making sure they've got the right things in the right place. The success threshold, you challenge them, you measure them. And if you get this right, you're starting to look at high performance. And what you're trying to do with those two big levers and everything that makes them up is to move that triangle, the organisation and the individuals in it, up to that top right corner. Right? But you've got choices. If you don't get these things right, you can move in any one of these directions. And what you tend to find is that poor leaders with no people attributes or abilities, the inability to really connect and motivate people and provide those things that followers need. Remember the four things we said? Belonging, belief, excitement, purpose, and authenticity in the leader. You end up down here. Okay? More often than not, you end up in one of those. So where you provide, where you say, here's our strategy, this is what we're going to do, but then don't support that, right? You end up there. What can often happen is that when you come back with your spanking new strategy, you dip up into high performance for a while, and then you drift back here because people suddenly realise it's not real. The engagement isn't real, it's not sustained, it's not long term, and therefore, what the hell, we'll just turn up with our pulse again. Okay. But of course, the true holy grail for the great leaders, the ones who are working at full stretch with the rubber band, they're up there. And generally it's because they've got high people abilities, the ability to engage people and to really meet all their needs. And there we are. So that's kind of part one of the book encapsulated. And then part two goes through about how you look at creating a high performance environment, how you actually do that in organisations, the talent selection, the development, the performance measures, and then of course what the leaders themselves need. Thank you very much indeed. And there are a few copies of the book. I brought a few over. I think on Amazon it's about $15.99 at the moment. Those are going for £10 if you're interested. Thank you very much for your time.